Mr. Barr, have you ever intervened other than to help the president's friend get a reduced prison sentence for any other case where a prosecutor had filed a sentencing recommendation with the court?
A sentencing recommendation?
Yeah. Have you ever intervened other than that case with the president's friend?
Not that I recall, if you're talking...
Does that seem like something you'd recall, where you would...
Well, I'm saying I can't really remember my first, if you let me finish the question. I can't remember.
deal.
30 years ago, I was Attorney General.
As Attorney General now.
No, I didn't. But that's because issues come up to the Attorney General within a dispute. And I've never heard of a dispute. I've never heard of a dispute in the department where line prosecutors threaten to quit.
Well, it's a pretty big deal, and they withdrew
because of a
Mr. Barr,
discussion over sentencing.
Americans from both parties are concerned that in Donald Trump's America, there's two systems of justice. One for Mr. Trump and his cronies, and another for the rest of us. But that can only happen if you enable it. At your confirmation hearing, you were asked, do you believe a president could lawfully issue a pardon in exchange for the recipient's promise to not incriminate him? You said, no.
Not to what?
That would be a crime. You were asked, could a president issue a pardon in exchange for the recipient's promise to not incriminate him? And you responded, no, that would be a crime. Is that right?
Yes, I said that.
You said a crime. You didn't say it'd be wrong. You didn't say it'd be unlawful. You said it would be a crime. And when you said that a president swapping a pardon to silence a witness would be a crime, you were promising the American people that if you saw that, you would do something about it. Is that right?
That's right.
Now, Mr. Barr, are you investigating Donald Trump for commuting the prison sentence of his longtime friend and political advisor, Roger Stone?
No.
Why not?
Why should I?
Well, let's talk about that. Mr. Stone was convicted by a jury on 7 counts of lying in the Russia investigation. He bragged that he lied to save Trump's butt. But why would he lie? Your prosecutors, Mr. Barr, told a jury that Stone lied because the truth looked bad for Donald Trump. And what truth is that? Well, Donald Trump denied in written answers to the Russia investigators that he talked to Roger Stone during the time Roger Stone was in contact with agents of a Russian influence operation. There's evidence that Trump and Stone indeed did talk during that time. You would agree that it's a federal crime to lie under oath. Is that right?
Yes.
It's a crime for you, it's a crime for me, and it's certainly a crime for the President of the United States. Is that right?
Yes.
So if Donald Trump lied to the Mueller investigators, which you agree would be a crime, then Roger Stone was in a position to expose Donald Trump's lies. Are you familiar with the December 3rd, 2018 tweet where Donald Trump said Roger Stone had shown guts by not testifying against him?
No, I'm not familiar with that.
You don't read the president's tweets?
No.
Well, there's a lot of evidence in the president's tweets, Mr. Attorney General. I think you should start reading them because he said Mr. Stone showed guts, but on July 10 of this year, Roger Stone declared to a reporter, I had 29 or 30 conversations with Trump during the campaign period. Trump knows I was under enormous pressure to turn on him. It would have eased my situation considerably, but I didn't. The prosecutors wanted me to play Judas. I refused. Are you familiar with that Stone statement?
Actually, I'm not.
So how can you sit here and tell us, why should I investigate the President of the United States if you're not even aware of the facts concerning the President using the pardon or commutation power to swap the silence of a witness?
Because we require, a reliable predicate before we open a criminal investigation.
And I just gave to you, sir.
I don't consider it. I consider it a very Rube Goldberg theory that you have.
Well, it sounds like you're hearing this.
And by the way, if I applied this standard, there'd be a lot more people under investigation.
Mr. Attorney General, the very same day that Roger Stone said that, Donald Trump,
that's one of the,
no surprise,
the true two standards of justice were really during the tail end of the Obama administration.
Mr. Attorney General, let's turn to the Michael Cohen case. Are you aware, sir, that Michael Cohen, after being released from prison, was asked to not engage with the media, including to write a book? Were you aware that that was going to be asked of him?
Was I aware?
Yes.
No.
Do you know if anyone else in your department was aware?
Maybe I should tell you what happened.
Why don't you tell us what happened?
Okay. He was furloughed from the Bureau of Prisons.
No. Why don't you tell us why he was asked
I will
to
tell
sign
you.
an agreement not
Because something that people don't seem to understand is that his home confinement was not being supervised by the Bureau of Prisons. It was being supervised by the probation office, which is part of the U.S. court system. And it was the U.S. court system that had the requirements about not writing.
That U.S. court system called your actions retaliatory. Do you agree with that?
No, so all I know is what has been said in court before the judge and in the record, which is that the individual was then called by the U.S. court system saying that this guy Cohen is uncooperative, he's not agreeing to the conditions. And at that point, a Bureau of Prisons person made the decision that he was no longer eligible for home confinement.
Conditions that a federal judge said no other inmate had ever been asked of in his experience. Mr. Barr, you told ABC News that the president's tweets sometimes make your job impossible. But, sir, your job is only impossible if you enable the president's corrupt schemes. And I yield back.
Hello, kiddies. Meet the Joker.
Mr. Barr, on June 1st, there were protests against the murder of George Floyd and police brutality in Lafayette Park. Let us not be distracted by you or my GOP colleagues as to what these powerful and massive protests were actually about. They were about the persistent killing of black bodies by law enforcement, and finally, an awakening in America of the conscience of our country. And yet your response, Mr. Barr, was to direct federal officers to close in on the protesters and to use shields offensively as weapons, tear gas, pepper balls, irritants, explosive devices, batons, and horses to clear the area just so the president could get a photo op. So I do want to ask you, do you think that your response, do you think the response at Lafayette Square to tear gas, pepper spray, and beat protesters and injure American citizens who were just simply exercising their First Amendment rights was appropriate?
Well, first, it's my understanding that no tear gas was used on Monday, June 1st.
Mr. Barr, that is a semantic distinction that has been proven false by many fact checkers.
How is it semantic?
Do you think?
How is it semantic? Tear gas is a particular compound.
You talked about chemical irritants, and it has been proven false by reports. So just answer the question. Do you think that it was appropriate at Lafayette Park to pepper spray, tear gas, and beat protesters and injure American citizens?
Well, I don't accept your characterization of what happened, but as I explained, the effort there was
Mr. Barr, I just asked for a yes or no, so let me just tell you, I'm starting to lose my temper. According to sworn testimony before the House Natural Resources Committee by Army National Guard officer Adam DeMarco, who was there, this was, quote, an unprovoked escalation and excessive use of force against peaceful protesters.
Well, I don't
Numerous media
remember
reports
DeMarco as being,
Mr. Barr, excuse me, this is my time. Sir, the president told governors on a telephone call that the way to deal with the protesters of police brutality and systemic racism like in Lafayette Square is that, quote, you have to get much tougher. You have to dominate. If you don't dominate, you're wasting your time. These are terrorists. And he also talked about you on that call, sir. Here's what he said. He said, the Attorney General is here, Bill Barr, and we will activate Bill Barr and activate him strongly. Do you remember that call, Mr. Barr?
Yes, I do, but he wasn't talking about protesters. He was talking
Mr.
about
Barr,
rioters.
apparently the president believes that you can be activated to implement the president's agenda and dominate American people exercising First Amendment rights if they're protesting against him. But let's look at how you respond when the protesters are supporters of the president. On two separate occasions, after President Trump tweeted, "Liberate Michigan," to subvert stay-home orders to protect the public health of people in Michigan, protesters swarmed the Michigan Capitol carrying guns some with swastikas, Confederate flags, and one even with a dark-haired doll with a noose around its neck. Are you aware that these protesters called for the governor to be lynched, shot, and beheaded?
No,
You're not aware of that?
I was not aware of it.
Major protests in Michigan. You're the Attorney General, and you didn't know that the protesters called for the governor to be lynched, shot, and beheaded. So obviously you couldn't be concerned about that.
Well, there are a lot
You-
of
you
protests
didn't-
around the United States, and on June
Attorney
1st,
General
I
Barr,
was worried
you seem
about
to
the
be
District of
engaging
Columbia,
in
which is
protests
federal.
in certain parts of the country. You're very aware of those, but when protesters with guns and swastikas and
I am
Confederate
aware of
flags, excuse me,
protesters
Mr.
in the
Barr, this
federal
is
government.
my time and I control it. You are aware of certain kinds of protesters, but in Michigan, when protesters carry guns and Confederate flags and swastikas and call for the governor of Michigan to be beheaded and shot and lynched, somehow you're not aware of that. Somehow you didn't know about it, so you didn't send federal agents in to do to the president's supporters what you did to the president's protesters. In fact, you didn't put pepper balls on those protesters. So the point I'm trying to make here, Mr. Barr, that I think is very important for the country to understand, is that there is a real discrepancy in how you react as the Attorney General, the top cop in this country, when white men with swastikas storm a government building with guns. There is no need for the president to, quote, activate you because they're getting the president's personal agenda done. But when black people and people of color protest police brutality, systemic racism, and the president's very own lack of response to those critical issues, then you forcibly remove them with armed federal officers, pepper bombs, because they are considered terrorists by the president. You take an aggressive approach to Black Lives Matter protests, but not to right-wing extremists threatening to lynch a governor if it's for the president's benefit. Did I get it right, Mr. Barr?
I have responsibility for the federal government, and the White House is the seat of the executive
Mr. Barr, let me just
branch,
make it clear.
not
You
for
are
the-
supposed to
the Michigan
represent
authorities
the
can
people
handle-
of the United
Michigan
States
authorities
of
can
America,
handle-
not violate people's First Amendment rights. You are supposed to uphold democracy and secure equal justice under the law, not violently dismantle certain protesters based on the president's personal agenda.
Gentlelady's time has expired.
As I made clear, moving H Street out to I Street as the perimeter was a decision made the day before. It was justified by the extreme rioting that was going on around the White House. I don't remember Captain DeMarco, who is the same Captain DeMarco who ran as a Democratic candidate for Congress in Maryland, even being close to the discussions as to what was going on. Now, the fact is that the movement was not geared to the behavior of that particular crowd. It was geared to the fact that we were moving the perimeter out so we could put a fence up on H Street, by H Street. But it is a fact that the Park Police reported, and I saw myself projectiles being thrown from that crowd. So I did not consider them all peaceful protesters.
So let's go into what happened yesterday as well, after repeating the false claim for months that mail-in ballots would lead to widespread voter fraud. The president himself yesterday encouraged voter fraud. When asked by a North Carolina reporter if he had confidence in the state system, the president urged voters to test the system by trying to cast 2 ballots, one by mail and another in person.
They'll go out and they'll vote, and they're going to have to go and check their vote by going to the poll and voting that way, because if it tabulates, then they won't be able to do that. So let them send it in and let them go vote. And if their system's as good as they say it is, then obviously they won't be able to vote. If it isn't tabulated, they'll be able to vote. So that's the way it is. And that's what they should do.
Mika, I'm a simple country lawyer.
Yeah.
But even I know that's a felony. You have the President of the United States. And seriously, if this isn't what an autocrat would do, this is the President of the United States encouraging his supporters to commit a felony by voting twice. And it's a felony. Certainly a felony in many states, but it's against the law in every state. And again, Donald Trump is the one that's been whining about voter fraud.
Yeah.
Creating a conspiracy theory where there's not one. And here he is actually encouraging people to engage in voter fraud.
That's just, it's
so, Mark, is that not a crime? I don't know. I
well,
would think,
you could ask the Attorney General.
I would, okay.
You could ask the Attorney General of the United States
know.
of America, because you would think
He'll
he
know.
is the one who,
Yeah, he'll know.
So Bill Barr attempted to explain the president's new guidance.
Good.
Take a listen.
About this felony.
He's trying to make the point that the ability to monitor this system is not good. And if it was so good, if you tried to vote a second time, you would be caught if you voted in person.
That would be illegal if they did that. If somebody mailed in a ballot and then actually showed up to vote in person, that would be illegal.
I don't know what the law in the particular state says.
You can't vote twice.
Well, I don't know what the law in the particular state says and when that vote becomes final.
Any state that says you can vote twice?
Well, there's some, maybe that you can change your vote up to a particular time. I don't know what the law is, so I'm not going to offer.
He was saying test the system.
If you know what he's saying, why are you asking me what he's saying?
Wow, that's a bad guy.
Claire McCaskill,
That's a bad guy.
He is an extraordinarily,
not a good man.
An extraordinarily bad public servant.
Just the worst.
And you really, Claire, I think
just the worst.
I think Donald Trump and Bill Barr, in those 2 clips yesterday, they have saved us from having to explain the depths to which they plunged during the Trump era. All we have to do is play our grandchildren those 2 clips, and they'll look at us and they'll say, "Granddad, that must have been really bad."
Yeah, all of the people out there that thought Bill Barr was going to be somebody who defended the institution of justice in this country. And by the way, that was the talk in Washington when he was nominated, that he would be a normal attorney general. There is not in the history of this country a frickin' attorney general that goes on national news and doesn't say it's a felony to try to vote twice, and the president has no business advising people to do that. I mean, what is wrong with this man? How embarrassing for our country. We have stood for the rule of law as a bright, shining light across the world, that we had a real rule of law where politics stopped at the doorstep. And this administration has absolutely ruined the Department of Justice's reputation as somebody who is a sentry for justice and the law. It is just outrageous. And this whole mail-in ballot thing, somebody needs to call Cory Gardner. You know, Cory Gardner got elected in 2014 with mail-in ballots. All mail-in ballots in Colorado. How do you think Cory Gardner is feeling right about now, when Colorado knows they have a secure and safe mail-in balloting system? That's what elected Cory Gardner. Look at Massachusetts yesterday. Record turnout. They had the results last night. Short waits and a huge mail-in vote that was counted the night of the election.
Make your mark,